Welcome, friends. Today we are going to explore the first stanza of the first volume of the Secret Doctrine, but not in the traditional way. We are going to look how this stanza can become a guide for meditation. The information I'm going to present is part of a new book that is almost finished, Approaching the Secret Doctrine, an Introduction to Cosmogenesis, which will be available early next year. So before we start, we need to examine some basic concepts that will give us the clue as to how to use the first stanza in this way as an application to meditation. The first concept is the idea that human beings are a reflection of the universe. Blavatsky said, man as a whole contains every element that is found in the universe, as there is nothing in the macrocosm that is not in the microcosm. The basic idea here is that we are a reflection of the cosmos. Every element that is in the cosmos, every force, every state of consciousness, find a reflection in human beings. The other important concept is the idea that when we read the Secret Doctrine, we can interpret its content from different points of view, using different keys of interpretation. Blavatsky says there are 7 keys of interpretation to every symbol and allegory. That which may not fit a meaning, say from the psychological or astronomical aspect, will be found quite correct from the physical or metaphysical. So the idea here is that when you read something in the Secret Doctrine, that can be interpreted from all these different points of view. Normally, the Secret Doctrine interprets the information that is in the stanzas from an astronomical point of view, from a metaphysical point of view, sometimes from a spiritual point of view. There are other points of view that we can use to interpret the stanzas, for example, the psychological, the physiological, etc. In order to apply the information in the first stanza to meditation, we need to apply what we read there in a psychological way. And that's what I'm going to present today. But before we go there, let's see an example that Blavatsky gives us about this kind of interpretation. She says, let us remember that when we speak of men, it is a perfect analogy with the cosmos. That which we call absolute, para-Brahman, and the first logos, is the higher self, Atman, and the spiritual wisdom, Buddhi, in man. So para-Brahman is a perfect analogy to the higher self, Atman, in human beings, and the first logos is a perfect analogy to Buddhi, to our spiritual wisdom. And then she continues, then the third logos is the mind, manas. That means that when we read the Secret Doctrine, when we read something about, let's say, the first logos, it can also be interpreted as explaining the Buddhic principle in us. When we read something about the third logos, it can be interpreted as talking about the principle of mind in ourselves. Of course, as a reflection, when we talk about the third logos on a cosmic level, the field of action of that third logos is universal. When we talk about the third logos at the level of a human being, then the field of action will be at the level of the microcosm, what we call a human being. So using these concepts, what we can do is to draw these parallelisms. For example, here we can, using what Blavatsky just said, we can draw these correspondences. The absolute corresponds to the higher self in human beings, Atman. As we said, the first logos to the spiritual wisdom, Buddhi. The second and third logos, the second logos is a kind of transition between the first and the third. These two correspond with the mind, the higher and the lower mind. The third logos is the manifested logos. The lower mind is the mind that is manifested on the lower planes. And then Fohat is connected to the passional nature in human beings, Kama, Fohat being the energy, the astral light to the astral double, and the physical cosmic plane to the physical body in human beings. Now, this would be a spiritual interpretation of these concepts. We are taking the whole of the human constitution. But because all these teachings can be read with different keys, we can also interpret this from a psychological perspective, with a psychological key. That means to take these correspondences and apply them to the human mind. So for example, we will have that the three higher aspects of the cosmos, the absolute, the first logos, and the second logos, correspond to the three higher states of the human mind, which is called the higher mind in theosophy, or higher manas. And then the four lower principles in the cosmos, from the third logos down to the physical, would correspond to the four lower states of consciousness that are available to the lower mind. So you see, in the previous one, we took the 7 principles and draw correspondences to the 7 principles in men. Now we are taking the 7 cosmic principles and draw correspondences to one of those principles in human beings, the principle of mind, which is also sevenfold. So we can draw this kind of parallelisms. So what is important here is that anything that is mentioned in the secret doctrine about the absolute corresponds to the highest state at the level of the higher mind, you see? So the absolute is the ultimate level, the ultimate reality in the cosmos. When applied to the human mind, the absolute would correspond to the highest mental state. Now, Blavatsky explains that the highest state on any plane of any principle is a bridge to the next higher principle. So the principle that is higher than the mind is buddhi. So when we reach the highest state at the level of manas, at the level of the higher mind, that will take us to buddhi. And this is how we can interpret the secret doctrine, particularly in this case, the first stanza, as a guide for meditation, because the first stanza talks about a state in the universe where there is only the absolute reality there. And the description of the universe in its absolute state can be interpreted as a description of our mind in its highest state. So we can seek in meditation to reach that state of mind, which is the one that will take us beyond to realize our Buddhic nature. So let's see how we can do this. The first shloka in the first stanza talks about the eternal parent, the space. So space is the only reality that is there, that is immutable, when everything else is in pralaya, is resting, is not manifested. Similarly, in the highest mental state, we find only a sense of spaciousness. Meditations on space are important in the theosophical tradition. In her diagram of meditation, Blavatsky says that the first thing we should try to do is to conceive of the infinite space and time, of an expansion in infinite space and time. And this is because in the highest mental state, one of the qualities of that state is a sense of spaciousness, of expansion, that is spontaneous, is not generated by thought, but in a practice of meditation, we may start using our thought and imagination until we drop that and we stay in the pure sense of spaciousness. So in meditation, seek for that sense of spaciousness. Then the second shloka says, time was not, it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration. Duration is that, like this timeless state. So that means that in the highest mental state, there is no sense of time. There is just a continuous nowness, a continuous right now. That means that to reach the highest mental state, we have to drop any sense of the past. We have to drop any sense of the future, any expectation. We have to focus in the now. So the sense of spaciousness, the sense of nowness, these are the things that we have to search, to look for in meditation, because these are the marks of this highest mental state. So the next one, the next shloka says that the universal mind was not, for there were no celestial beings to manifest it. Applied to our minds, it would be that there is no mental activity in the highest mental state, for there is no personal self to produce it. So here again, we know that in meditation, as we delve deeply in our nature, we have to go beyond the mental activity. We have to go beyond the process of thought. When we leave behind the thinker, that is the personal self, then there is no production of thoughts. So we begin to see the quality of that highest mental state: spaciousness, nowness, silence. Then the shloka continues, the next one, the way to bliss and the causes of misery were not, for there was no one to produce and get snared by them. So there is, at that point when the universe is in its absolute state, there is no a means to attain bliss, and there are no causes of misery, because there are no separate beings to seek for the bliss or to cause misery. So similarly, in the highest mental state, we can say that it is a state where we are not searching for bliss, we are not searching for anything in particular. In preliminary stages, we may be searching for a state of quietness, searching for this, searching for that. But as long as there is a search, that means that we are not in the highest mental state. We are still in the realm of thinking, of the thinker, which may be necessary before we can transcend that, but it's definitely not the highest mental state. Because in that state, there is no search for bliss, there is no intention to feel good, there is no running away from sorrow either. There is neither search for bliss nor cause of sorrow, for there is no one to seek that bliss or to suffer. When we get to the highest mental state, the personal self has been transcended. There is just this sense of spaciousness, of being right now, in complete silence, without mental activity, and therefore there is no search for bliss or escape from sorrow. So the next shloka says, darkness alone filled the boundless all. Because we may ask ourselves, so what is there when there is this sense of space that is not being identified with the space that my body occupies? What is there when there is this sense of nowness that is not identified with my past, with my history, and is not identified with my wishes and with my future endeavors? What is there when there is no personal thoughts and memory, no personal mental activity? What is there when I'm not seeking bliss or I'm not running away from suffering? What is there in that mental state is just a sense or a state of dark silence. You see, mystics frequently talk about the divine as this divine darkness, or they talk about the divine as being wrapped in silence, dwelling in silence. So if we are in this higher mental state, none of those personal activities are there any longer. And there is a dwelling in this state of dark silent, of silent darkness. It is a silent awareness. As we are going to see, this doesn't imply that we just fainted, we just fell unconscious. This implies a higher state of consciousness than the one that we normally experience, as we are going to see. So is this a state of annihilation, as I was saying, a state of fainting? Is this description to the personal self sounds like something that is less than what the personal self normally experiences, thought, memory, wishes, etc. However, when the shloka describes this state in the universe, it says the universe was immersed in absolute perfection, not was. So that state of dark silence, which to the personal self may feel like emptiness, like annihilation, like nothingness, it's actually a state of perfection. And when we experience this state, we can understand why. In that state of silent awareness is one in which everything is perfect just the way it is. We are not seeking for bliss, for pleasure. We are not escaping from sorrow, as we said. It is a state of just being where even though there is nothing of the personal, we can say it's empty of the personal, there is actually a fullness because there is no need in that state. We are not seeking to change to acquire something else. So we can say that from a psychological point of view, there is a sense of being immersed in perfect non-being. Now, this non-being is not, again, nothingness. It's just that we have transcended the personal self, which is separate, which is full of needs, which is full of expectations. So the next shloka says the causes of existence, of separate existence, had been done away with. The visible that was rested in eternal non-being, the one being. I'm showing the shlokas abbreviated so that they are useful for our interpretation. So the idea here is that in that state of absolute perfection, where there is this non-being, there is no sense of separate existence, is because, as the shloka says here, the causes of separate existence have been eliminated. So this is how we can interpret it in terms of our mind. The causes of separate existence have stopped in that meditation when we are in the highest mental state. And what there is there is just resting in this eternal non-being, which the shloka says that non-being is actually the one being. It's not the personal being, the personal self. It's the universal self, which can be described as non-self because it's not no self in particular. So I think the shloka is trying to show here that that thing that we call non-being is also the universal being. We come to a place where words are not really appropriate because words belong to the place of separation. And this is describing a state that is beyond separation. So in that silent, dark perfection, there is no separate being, there is just resting in this more universal being. So what is there? The shloka says, alone, the one form of existence, stretched, boundless, infinite, causeless, pulsating unconscious through the all presence. So there is just the sense of existing. There is no, again, this is not just annihilation. There is a form of existence. There is a sense of I exist, I am. Not that we are thinking about that. There is just the awareness of just being, which is boundless, infinite, causeless. It's not I am this personality. It's not restricted to I am something or the other. It's just a boundless, infinite sense of existence that the shloka says pulsates unconscious through that all presence. So there is this sense of existence that is unconscious. Now, does this mean that we are unconscious in the higher mental state? If we interpret this in terms of a psychological perspective, what we find is that there is a boundless and causeless non-cognitive presence. You see that the shloka talks about an all presence. There is a presence there, but it says it's unconscious. And what that refers to is that there is a non-cognitive presence. Patanjali, for example, when talking about the higher samadhis, he talks about non-cognitive states, asampranyata, he says. And the Christian mystics, for example, the cloud of unknowing, also talks about a state of not knowing, going beyond any cognition, going beyond any mental activity. So when the shloka says unconscious, what it's saying is it's a presence, but that is a presence that is not thinking. It's a quiet presence that is non-cognitive, because we have transcended the cognition of the personal self. And lastly, the shloka describes this as the soul of the universe was in absolute being and consciousness, which is absolute non-being and unconsciousness. So here again, when we are talking about these high states, no word is really appropriate because the words are designed to talk about the duality. If something is conscious, then it is not unconscious. But when we go to the absolute state, we are in a state that is the synthesis of the two. It's neither one or the other of the opposites. It's rather a synthesis. So you can say that from a certain point of view is absolute consciousness. From another point of view is absolute unconsciousness. It's not consciousness as you know it. It's not unconsciousness as you know it. So this gives us the clue that in the highest mental state, the mind is in a state of perfect beingness. Blavatsky created this word beingness to talk about this state that is beyond being, beyond an individual being. So this state of perfect, you see we talked about the absolute perfection of that state. In this state of perfect beingness, this state is beyond any becoming, beyond any effort, beyond any trying to be, trying to attain. There is just the perfection of beingness. Of course, not the beingness at the level of Atman. Remember, we are applying all this to the mental state. This is the presence of the beingness at the level of the mind. Beingness also manifests itself on the Buddhic level in a deeper way, and on the Atmic level in the purest way. But when we come to the realm of the mind, this state is a state in which we can fall back into this beingness as it expresses itself through the mind. And dwelling here, dwelling in this highest mental state, we are taking beyond. This is not something that happens out of any effort on our part. We have already transcended the effort. We have used effort to get to this point, and now we just dwell in the perfection of just being, a silent awareness there. And then we are taken beyond to the Buddhic nature. All this, as I mentioned, is explained in this book, Approaching the Secret Doctrine. It is explained in more detail. For those who may be interested, the book will be available next year. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you a good meeting.